Welcome to Charlie's Cinema Club, where I talk about the movies you want to see. You just don't know it yet. Today, I'm gonna do something a bit different. Instead of talking about one film, I'm gonna talk about two, and you will soon see why. From time to time during my movie watching experience, there are moments that reveal surprising parallels between movies. Moments when I realize that some modern blockbusters are simply remakes of older films, or moments when it almost seems as though there was some greater meaning behind my random viewing choices. When I happened to watch the exact films being referenced in another movie shortly afterward. But nowhere was this as striking as with Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove. In fact, besides having an extraordinary number of similarities in their plots, the films also share a common history. Both are adaptations of novels, and the novels themselves were so similar that a plagiarism lawsuit was filed. The movies were produced at the same time, but released 9 months apart. An arrangement insisted upon by Stanley Kubrick, who feared for the success of his own film. His concern was not unfounded, since his competitor was none other than Sidney Lumet, who already had an Oscar nomination under his belt, and a cast featuring celebrated actors like Henry Fonda and Walter Matthau. Since Kubrick had acquired the creative rights to the novel on which this film is based, and the plagiarism case, though settled out of court, clearly favored Kubrick's choice, he persuaded Columbia Pictures, which financed Dr. Strangelove, to also buy Failsafe and delay its release by a sufficient margin. And so it happened that out of two very similar films, one became a celebrated classic, while the other faded into near obscurity. Both films share the same premise. Planes carrying nuclear warheads are en route to Russia. It's no longer possible to contact or stop the pilots. In both, the US president does everything he can, in cooperation with the Russian leader, to coordinate a defense against the aircraft, but the efforts fail. Meanwhile, a mad German hatches plans, and in the end, the leaders are left with only drastic measures. Dr. Strangelove approaches the fear of nuclear war, an omnipresent theme in the early 60s, through a biting satire. A deranged general, convinced that the Russians are contaminating precious American bodily fluids, becomes the figurehead of paranoia born from misinformation, propaganda, espionage, counter-espionage, and counter-espionage. A former Nazi, not as distant from his past as he pretends to be, now advises the president and ultimately presents an astonishingly well-thought-out plan for the survival of the social elites. A clear jab at the many Nazi scientists who, at the end of the war, were pardoned and given citizenship and jobs in the weapons research industry rather than punishment. A weak president, egoistical generals, an idiot of a bomber pilot. Kubrick leaves no aspect of the crisis untouched by satire, no position unmocked. Failsafe, by contrast, is a deadly serious thriller. Whereas Dr. Strangelove pins the blame on the entire crisis on a single unhinged general, Failsafe begins with a technical malfunction. No one is at fault, and yet catastrophe looms. The absence of responsibility highlights both the mistrust in technological advances in warfare and the helplessness in the face of the threat that must have felt very real to the public. And yet, had World War III truly broken out, it seems far more likely that it would have been triggered by wounded male egos than pure accident. Point for Dr. Strangelove. While Dr. Strangelove features only the mad general and the desperate advisor scrambling for a solution, Failsafe introduces a third voice, Dr. Grochler, a White House advisor who calmly argues against recalling the bombers, insisting that the situation presents an opportunity, a surprise attack on the USSR that could easily be won. Here, the advisor with the suspiciously German name indulges in war fantasies. Point for Failsafe. In Failsafe, the threat perceived by the audience arises solely from the fear of retaliation, whereas in Dr. Strangelove, it comes from the Russians' doomsday device. Once Russia is hit, bombs with enough material to plunge the world into a nuclear winter for decades are automatically detonated. Survival will only be possible deep underground. Quickly, the decision is made to save certain elites and start a subterranean breeding program with enough women to ensure humanity's continuation. Failsafe, however, insists on resolving the conflict without further warfare, and so it's ultimately the President of the United States himself who devises the most insane plan of all. As an apology and compensation for the destruction of Moscow, he offers to drop a nuclear bomb on New York. The saving of elites trope has stood the test of time. Every second disaster movie uses it, and it's generally considered realistic. But sacrificing one's own population on that scale to avert a war is something I've never seen before or since. And suddenly, in the conclusion, satire becomes reality and realism becomes absurd. An intriguing contrast. Dr. Strangelove stands out, aside from its content, for its stunning war room set and several iconic images like the cowboy riding the bomb into the apocalypse. Failsafe impresses with its tight camera work, many close-ups and charged silences. Both films have excellent casts, though Peter Sellers playing 3 roles deserves a special mention. For me, ultimately it comes down to taste. Personally, I preferred Failsafe partly because I'm a big Walter Matthau fan, and partly because humor just isn't my thing. For anyone interested in the mood of the era, I wholeheartedly recommend watching both. I think they work best as a pair. Go watch them.